Good evening, everyone. Shriram College of Commerce, established in 1926, is India's most premier and prestigious institution in the field of commerce and economics. It not only serves as a pilgrimage for students seeking excellence in academics, but also for inculcating practical life and professional experiences in the students through extracurricular activities. The Commerce Society SRCC is the largest and one of the most esteemed societies in the prestigious institution, with a legacy of over 50 years. It has been ranked as the best commerce society across the University of Delhi. Those who believe make their ideas come alive, and we believe in chasing them. We hope and believe that you would have enjoyed and grasped much knowledge out of our first speaker session. And with your cooperation, we could make it a huge success. Keeping up with the flow, we are delighted to host Mr. Anil Swarup under our series Speak Street, where experience speaks.
It is our greatest privilege to host Mr. Anil Swarup, an Indian author and retired Indian Administrative Service Officer of Uttar Pradesh cadre of 1981 batch. Sir, in his 30 years of career, have served in various capacities and later went on to become the Secretary to the Government of India. Sir joined IAS in 1981 and is the recipient of Director's Gold Medal for Best Officer Trainee of his batch at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. Sir has served in various key positions for both the Union government and the government of Uttar Pradesh, like Education Secretary of India, Whole Secretary of India, Additional Secretary in the Cabinet Secretariat of India, Additional Secretary in Labour and Empowerment, Export Commissioner in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry of India, and as the District Magistrate of Lakhimpur Kheri during the Babri Masjid and Ram Janmabhoomi agitation. Sir has also authored two books named Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant and Not Just a Civil Servant, which provides intimate view of the Indian administrative services through his personal account. In today's session, Sir would be giving us insights on making things happen in the government. And also we will have a question and answer session towards the end, where you all can ask questions to Sir by putting it in the chat box or raising your hand. Now, I would like to welcome Sir to share his thoughts upon us.
A very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for those very kind words. I intend speaking about making things better. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
I think someone will have to switch off his mic because otherwise it's echoing. Others will have to switch off their mics. Thank you. So I will be talking about making things happen in the government. You know, normally, as you all are youngsters and some of you will join the government, the normal challenge for the government is to get things moving on the ground. There's a lot of talking happening, there's a lot of policy formulation happening, but the common man has this impression that nothing happens in the government. So today I will try and touch upon aspects just to explain to you first as to why things don't happen in the government, and then try and tell you how things can happen in the government. In fact, my second book, Ethical Dilemma of the Civil Servant, could have easily been titled Make Things Happen, because that's what it is all about. What I have tried to do is to see what are the constraints within which the government functions and how do you overcome that constraints. The idea of mentioning those constraints is to not to dissuade people from making things happen. It's basically appreciation of ground reality, because I am convinced that until unless you appreciate the ground reality, you will never be able to make things happen. So first of all, what is necessary is to understand existence of a problem. You know, many of us don't even recognize the existence of a problem. If someone comes and tells me, I say, no, 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 everything is fine. You know that movie, All is Well, Three Idiots? You know, we are naturally defensive about our own mistakes. We want to hide our mistakes. And it is certain, and my experience tells me, both in the government and otherwise, the moment you start pushing the mistakes under the carpet, you are in trouble. Because first, in order to make things happen, you must appreciate the fact of it not happening. If something is already happening, what would you make it happen? So once you accept a problem or its existence, the next step is to understand the why of a problem. Because in order to find the solution of a problem, you have to understand the reason for that problem. Many occasions, even when we accept the problem, we just scratch the surface. And that is why things don't happen in the government. First, we'll try and cover up that problem. We'll say it does not exist. But somehow it gets revealed, then I'll try and scratch the surface and, paint it well so that it looks good. That again doesn't solve the problem. So you have to understand the why of the problem. Now, let me tell you, to an outsider, he thinks that it is very easy to do things. Why isn't government doing it? You walk around on a street and ask somebody, how should COVID be tackled? Almost, and if I ask you all, youngsters, that how should COVID be tackled, almost everyone will have a view that this is how it should be done. But it's not easy to do it. The easiest thing on earth is talking, which I am doing these days because I don't have to do anything and keep talking. And the second easiest thing is to give advice. So you have quintessential Rai Sahabs, as we call them in UP, because they only give Rai. They wouldn't have done anything in their lives, but they give you an advice what to do. These days, recently I wrote an article on advisors that come all the way from Atlantic to India. And they're very expensive advisors. They stay here for a while and then they feel frustrated. They go back across the Atlantic because the Indian terrain is very hot. It's not very easy to do things. So they go back and continue to pontificate that things should be done this way, this way, this way. But in order to make things happen, as I said, you must understand the terrain. And the terrain in a democratic country is a difficult one. Difficult doesn't mean that you can't overcome it, but you have to recognize the difficulty of it. In a democracy like ours, and listen to this very carefully, to make things happen, any idea has to first be politically acceptable. And I'll explain this to you. It has to be socially desirable. It has to be technologically feasible. It has to be financially viable. It has to be administratively doable. It has to be judicially tenable. And I've added the seventh dimension, thanks to these farm laws, that it has to be socially relatable. Now, let me explain each one of them. And the idea of identifying these dimensions or the problems is to see how you can go around them and do it. The idea is not to dissuade you, ki itni problems hum kaise karenge. No. The idea is to appreciate. And I've always told all the youngsters that I interact with, and I interact with almost every day with them, I tell them, keep your eyes wide open. Understand the ground reality. Appreciate the ground reality, and then try and work out an arrangement on how to do it. Now, let me take each aspect one by one. What do I mean by political acceptability? No matter in the government how great an idea you may come, if your minister doesn't agree with your idea, you are done. It won't go any distance. But that doesn't mean that you should not be telling your ideas to the minister. What you have to do is to package that ideas in a manner that it becomes acceptable to him. Now, whatever your idea, whether some of you will be working in the private sector also, if you have an idea and whoever you're going to talk to, you have to convince that person into believing that your idea is also beneficial to them. That's the art. That's the art also political domain. So in my 38 years as a civil servant, in more than 90% of the cases, I managed to convince the politician about what I was saying. And I'll give you a couple of instances how I did it. But there were 5 to 10% cases where I couldn't convince him. And he being the ultimate master, he decides what needs to be done. And I keep telling civil servants, in those 10% cases, then you should not put a spoke. Then you should do what your master is saying, the politician is saying. And mind you, when I joined the service, I was also of the impression, which some of you would be, that all wrong is because of politicians. And all politicians are rascals. It is grossly untrue. I had the occasion to work with absolutely outstanding politicians. And if you happen to read my book, there are few chapters on Mr. Kalyan Singh, who was the chief minister of UP, and I had a fabulous time with him. I had a great time with Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge. And these are from different political parties. They don't belong to one political party, but there are good people in politicians also. Why? Because they also come from this society. The tragedy of our existence is we condemn. Sorry, speaking. Can I request the others, Himani, if you could switch mic off? Thank you. So, because it echoes. If your mic is open, my voice echoes back to me. So, politicians are also good, bad, and ugly, as are civil servants. So, to treat everyone in a one group and condemning them doesn't serve the purpose, because you want to make things happen, so you can't condemn everybody and make things happen. So, you must appreciate that. I'll give you my personal experience, or of course, most of them are there in the book, where I talk about my interactions with various ministers. but a couple of them might interest you. I was district magistrate Lakhimpur Kheri, and after my stint as district magistrate Kheri, Mr. Kalyan Singh had become the chief minister of UP, and I'm talking of 91, 90, 91, yes. So he picked me up as his special secretary, as also director information and public relations. In those days, we did not have social media or television. It was all in the newspapers. So my job was that every morning I had to go to his residence and brief him about the media published. So on this particular day, I walked into his residence. He had an office there. So we were sitting in a drawing. As I walked into the drawing room, I saw the chief minister was sitting there, and chief secretary and the director general of police, they were standing, and there was some sort of tension in the room. It took me some time to understand what the tension was. I stood there just observing what was going on. Now, Mr. Kalyan Singh was very upset because he had to address about 8 meetings 2 days down the line in a by-election. He was upset because he was not well, and he didn't want to attend all those 8 meetings, and someone had fixed those meetings. I don't know the background, but there was a by-election. So he was very agitated, and he was saying that, please cancel the last 2 meetings. I'm assuming all of you understand Hindi, so in between I'll use Hindi phrases, because the conversation which was, if it was done in a particular language, translating it actually distorts it. So he was very angry कि किसने लगा दी इतनी मीटिंग से, आखिरी 2 मीटिंग कैंसिल कर दी. Now both the chief secretary and the director general of police were totally agreeing with him. Yes sir, आप कैसे करेंगे, आपकी तबीयत बहुत खराब है. No, मैं सुनता रहा थोड़ी देर. Then I could not hold myself for very long. So I butted in. I shouldn't have, but I butted in. I said, sir, मैं कुछ दिनों पहले जिलाधिकारी डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैजिस्ट्रेट था, और जब कोई चीफ मिनिस्टर किसी डिस्ट्रिक्ट में आता है तो बहुत तैयारियां होती हैं, लोगों को बहुत अपेक्षाएं, एक्सपेक्टेशंस होती हैं, आशाएं होती हैं, और वो चाहते हैं देखना आपको. तो मेरा सुझाव ये है कि आप जाएं जरूर इन सभाओं में, बोले नहीं आप आखिरी 2 सभाओं में, लेकिन जाएं जरूर, कैंसिल ना करें. So he got angry with me. He looked at me, said, "आप समझते मैं जा सकता हूँ?" Now the moment he said that, the chief secretary, he started nudging me with his elbow to keep quiet, asking me to keep quiet. No, I didn't keep quiet. So I responded to the chief minister. I told him, sir, मेरा काम आपको सलाह देना है, advice करना है. बाकी निर्णय आप ले लीजिए, आपको जाना नहीं जाना. So he again looked at me, and the chief secretary's nudging was even harder. So then there was a pin drop silence for 15 seconds, after which Mr. Kalyan Singh turned towards me and said, Anil ji, aap sahi kehte hain. The moment he said that, the chief secretary stopped nudging me straight away and said, हाँ sir, बिल्कुल सही कहता है. Now, why am I telling you this? I mean, in my book, I say I need not have spoken because this was a political issue. But I thought that as an advisor to the chief minister, it was my duty to inform him the implication of what he was doing. And then the decision was his. Now, here was a politician, and I had an idea. I packaged it in a manner that he understood the importance of what I was saying. He may have rejected it, he may have accepted it, but he accepted it. Let me tell you, in my career, as I said, there were so many occasions where my view was totally different from that of the minister. Many occasions. So I used to put it across, and on more often than not, the politician agreed. My last experience, let me narrate to you. This was my initial career. My last experience was 3 months before I retired. I got a message from Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, and he asked me to brief the Prime Minister on health insurance. So I told the Principal Secretary, sir, I am Secretary's Education Government of India. What have I to do with the health insurance? He said, you have done health insurance for 7 years, and everyone thinks that you have a good idea. We have been trying to convince the Prime Minister about health insurance for the past 3 years. We have not been able to do it, and hence we want you to come and explain it to the Prime Minister. Coming from PMO, I couldn't say no. I said, okay, sir. Then I visited the Prime Minister at his residence, and there a presentation was made by the Health Secretary. And what Health Secretary had to say was similar to what I had an idea. But after Health Secretary's presentation, the Prime Minister was very annoyed. Not really annoyed. What he said, कि ये तो आप इतने दिनों से हमें समझा रहे हैं, मैंने तो कहा था कुछ और लाइए आप. फिर उसके बाद then he turns towards me, he says, अनिल जी आप बताइए आपका क्या ख्याल है. So I, in my own words, I conveyed almost the same thing with the Health Secretary was saying. Almost. Marginal difference here and there. I don't want to go into the details of it. Some of it is there in my book. You can read it. After my 15 minutes of talking, the Prime Minister listened to me carefully, and then he said, हाँ, ठीक है. Now, One of the joint secretary almost fell from his chair. And when we came out, the joint secretary to the prime minister asked me, "Sir, आप ऐसे कैसे बोल लेते हैं prime minister से? आपको तो पता था कि वो नाराज हो जाते हैं." हमने कहा, यार देखो, I don't expect anything from the prime minister now or even after retirement. I have said what I thought was correct. It is for him to decide whether he wants to accept it or not. So going back to the original point that I was making, that if I say that this should be done, for example, there is this heated subject of reservation. Now, I may have a point of view on that, a very strong point of view, for or against it. But if I go and tell a politician, do you think a politician will ever accept that as it will be political harakiri? I'm not going into the merits of it. I'm only saying whatever you say has to be politically acceptable. If that doesn't happen, then there could be trouble. Trouble in the sense that your idea will not be accepted. So one is politically acceptable. So if you want to make things happen in the government, I'm not saying don't say something which the politician doesn't like. Package it in a manner to make him like it. Again, if you read my book, there are a number of instances where I explain how I tried to convince the politician. In one case, which might interest some of you, you remember that Cbse paper leak that happened 3 years ago? Did any one of you suffer in that? The paper leak? So
Yes.
I was the secretary of government of India, secretary government of India. And again, to cut a long story short, the long story is there in my book. I remember I was attending to my father who was critically ill, and I came to Delhi. And next morning, when I met the minister, the first thing he said, "We'll have to remove Chairman Cbse." First thing. Now I had to come up with an idea which was politically acceptable to him. Otherwise, she would have gone. Anita Karwal would have been shifted. So I told the minister, "Sir, Anita Karwal की क्या गलती है इसमें? नहीं, गलती तो नहीं है, लेकिन वो सिचुएशन डिफ्यूज हो जाएगी." Then I said, "Sir, आप ये सोचिए." Now this is the idea that came. I packaged my idea. I said कि right now she is the buffer between media and you. The moment you remove her from there, the whole media will be after. Bingo. He agreed with me. And Anita Karwal is not shifted out. Imagine, she is one of the most outstanding officers that has worked with me. And today she is Secretary Education, Government of India. So I packaged it in a manner that he agreed. About 4 months before that, in a similar situation, I had advised him to protect a particular IS officer. He didn't protect, and that IS officer had to resign from the IS. So it is not always that you succeed, but the attempt should be to see how I make my argument politically acceptable. It is different from doing everything that the politician tells you. You know, some of these IS officers who are very fond of displaying how many times they have been transferred. I mean, they take it as a medal of honor. I don't agree with them. I don't agree. Why? Because I feel that we have to understand the difference between compromise and accommodation. If he's telling you something which is illegal, don't do it. But if it is not illegal, you should not look at it with prejudice, which I did in the initial part of my career. I think he's a politician. He also has to attend to his constituency. Don't do anything illegal, but between legal and illegal, there is a huge gray area. If you can interpret to help him, please do that. So this is as far as politically acceptable. Now I come to social desirable. Now, if you want to, in government, what happens is, unlike in the private sector, you do a lot of research to see what sort of, good or service that a consumer would want. So if they like Aishwarya Rai and Amitabh Bachchan, so they will want Aishwarya Rai and Amitabh Bachchan to advertise Coca-Cola or whatever. So they will do that research and do it. In government, it doesn't happen that. In government, one fine morning, someone will have an idea and they will announce. And then they will work out how it has to be worked out. So if you want to any scheme to be socially acceptable, you have to understand the consumer. Where is he? What does he want? So that doesn't happen. If that doesn't happen, the idea may initially be acceptable, but it will not sustain. So, for example, most of the government schemes fail because the schemes are formulated in the air-conditioned rooms of Delhi, and I've seen that, without accounting for the ground reality, which is dust. So you had a scheme in which we'll do direct benefit transfer without taking into account whether that old man who has to get this old age pension, how will he go to a bank to get his pension? Right now, the provision was that a postman goes to his residence and delivers it. But if you do it through a banking system, you must work out a mechanism through which this amount will be delivered to the old man. I'm just giving a very random example. I can give you many more examples. So in order to make things happen in the government, you have to come up with an idea which the consumer can understand. So my first book has about 70 pages on a scheme called Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. It became a success here and world over because it accounted for the limitations of its consumer. So if you have the consumer in mind, if you have what they want, then the chances are that your scheme will work. So politically acceptable, socially desirable. Then you come to technological feasible. Now, these days, everyone talks about technology without understanding the ground reality. I remember when I became education secretary, and since I had no experience in education before that, in fact, I used to tell jokingly some people that government was looking for the most inexperienced, illiterate, uneducated civil servant to be made education secretary. And they found that in Mr. Anil Swarup, so I was made education secretary. Now, this reputation of mine as an illiterate, educated civil servant was traveling around. But India is a very fine country. You know, there's so many advisors. The Rai Saabs, they come and tell you what to do. So I had Rai Saabs within the country and even international Rai Saabs who came and told me what should be done. You know, one of the Rai Saabs from across the Atlantic came and told me, sir, why are you? So one of the biggest problems in education in rural areas is there's a shortage of teachers. So he comes and tells me, why are you bothered about teachers? Number of teachers. Sir, why don't you broadcast or webcast a class from Delhi and let every far and wide school hear you from here sitting in Delhi? So I told him, are you aware that the entire country is still not internet connected? Now, that guy was not fully conversant with that. So he was coming up with a solution which was not technologically feasible. I've given you a very extreme answer, but there could be similar answers. You have to understand it is not merely availability of technology, it's your capacity and capability to use the technology. Look at everyone is talking about artificial intelligence these days. So I jokingly keep telling people, you can become artificial, but first become real. Meaning thereby, use the existing technology to the time, not against artificial intelligence. It should be used, it would be used. But how about using existing technology? In fact, in government, we hardly use technology to the extent that we use. Because I recently wrote an article to illustrate that the Prime Minister is so fond of technology. In fact, he was fond of me because of using technology. I was the only civil servant which had initially done away with all files and papers. My office did not have a file or paper. It was all digitized. So I used to travel a lot through the country and I could do the files on my laptop. Of course, now there are a number of departments that have digitized, but at that point in time, there were only a handful of them. So technology, if feasible, is very important. You can't just talk technology without understanding the feasibility of it. Then fourth to my mind is the most important. हमारी तरफ यूपी में कहते हैं जेब में नहीं पत्ता चल दिए कलकत्ता. You know, unless you have money to back an idea, what will you do? You can have a great idea. People come up with, sir, हर school में आप smart TV लगा दिए. Where is the money for smart TV in every school? We are unable to pay the teachers you want smart. So the idea is good, but I don't have the money to back it. Now, this is not to say that you should not promote an idea where there is initially money not available. There are a number of ideas where if you present it properly, the money will come. And I'll give you that example of the health insurance scheme that I was doing. There, uh, initially money was not there, but we presented the case in such a manner that I remember 2 years down the line, one day before the budget, the Joint Secretary Budget used to ring me up asking me, how much money do you want? You know, the last couplet of my book, Ethical Dilemmas, is खुदी कुकर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. So if you can evolve as an individual, if you get an idea that is great, then people will come around. Initially, you have to travel alone. मैं अकेला ही चला था जाने बे मंजिल मगर लोग साथ आते गए कारवां होता गया. But अपनी खुद ही बुलंद करनी पड़ेगी. So if you come up with an idea which you are able to sell well, then money will follow. But you must understand that you should not come up with harebrained ideas and say money is not available because money is short. Like today, the government is strapped for funds because of COVID and otherwise. Now, you can't come up with an idea which requires a lot of money to back it. Like, for example, let me take the national education policy. I was engaged somewhat. I remember when Dr. Kasturi Ranga came over to meet me and he asked me for my suggestion of the national education policy. He was surprised by my response. I told him, you are wasting your time. He was surprised because we had constituted that committee and now I'm telling him, you are wasting your time. He said, why? Why do you say that? I said, I have no problem with education policy. The problem in this country is implementation. There is no dearth of diagnosis and prescription. Too much of them. Everyone has an idea. So when you formulate your national education policy, please attach an action plan clearly outlining what needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done. Because when you do that, you will understand the limitations of your of your ideas that you're giving. Of course, there is hardly any implementation plan along with this policy. And look at what is happening. He says 6% of the GDP should be given to education in this country. Now, this is nothing new that he's saying. This was said by Dr. Kothari decades ago. But it never, the maximum that it went up to was 3.1%. And look at what happens after the national education policy is announced. This year, in this budget, leave alone 6%, the actual nominal allocation is less than that of the previous year. In real terms, it will be much worse. So what are we talking? We are talking ideas. So if an idea has to travel some distance, जेब में पत्ता होना जरूरी है. Without financial backing, you're just talking. As I keep saying, these days I'm busy talking. I don't walk because I don't need to walk. But you have to walk and then talk, or at least walk the talk. Let me come to the next one. The administrative doability. Now, what is administrative doability? You have to have a structure to deliver things on the ground. You may have a great idea, you may have money, you have political acceptability, you have technological feasibility, but you don't have the human resource. Because ultimately, it is the human being who delivers this on the ground. To me, human essence or human values or human being is extremely, no matter how good a machine you get, unless you have the right person sitting at the right job, it won't work. Another article that I wrote recently, and there's another chapter in my book where I talk about the whole HR management. If the human resource is not managed appropriately, brilliant of ideas, lot of money, it will go down the drain. You would have heard a lot of money gets pumped into scheme, but it goes down the drain. Why? Because the human being who's managing those schemes is either corrupt or incompetent or inefficient. There's something wrong with the human being there. Hence, the human being, human element is very, very important. Then you come to the judicial tenability. This was one aspect that I could never take care of, because you don't really know which side will the oont of judiciary sit down. Most unpredictable. They owe no responsibility to anyone. They're neither they're responsible to the people or the parliament. They keep talking about others, what others should do, and the mess that is there in the judiciary, no one is looking into it. I was aghast. I wrote this book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. People ask me, how can you talk ethics these days when a Supreme Court judge holds a press conference against the Chief Justice of India? Then he himself becomes Chief Justice of India. Then there is a sexual harassment case against him, which is dropped. And I'm surprised, because if someone had wrongly arrested on sexual harassment case, that person who had wrongly alleged should have been behind the bars. What happens is there is a compromise. How can there be a compromise in a sexual harassment case? Either that harassment happened or it didn't happen. It can't be a compromise. So if it happened, then the Chief Justice of India should have been sacked. If it didn't happen, the complainant should have been sacked. But complainant is back in Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice of India is now member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha. So people ask me, how do you do that? So as far as judiciary is concerned, they're not accountable to anybody. If this conversation with you goes out, perhaps I will get a notice of contempt. It doesn't really matter to me, but that's how judiciary is. But nonetheless, whatever you do should not be patently violative of a law or the constitution. If it is so, then even if you have political backing, you have the money, technological feasibility, all the human resource, things will not happen in the world. The final dimension that I added was as a consequence of these farm bills. Now, my personal reading of these farm bills is, and there could be a difference of opinion, it may not be a perfect bill, but it is beneficial to the farmers. And we can have a debate on that. There could be some problems there which can be corrected, but it's beneficial. But look at what is happening. The farmers are up in arms. Why are they up in arms? Why? Because there was no social relatability in those farms. Now, let me explain this to you. What is socially relatable? When you come up with a legislation which has far-reaching consequences, you have to take stakeholders into confidence. Which were the stakeholders here? State governments, farmers, organizations. They should have been spoken with at length and convinced. Why I'm saying that? Because I'll tell you my personal experience in a different situation. When I was posted as Coal Secretary, Government of India, I didn't know much about the coal sector. So I rang up a friend of mine and asked him, yaar, coal sector kaisa hai? So instead of responding to my question, he said, gangs of Wasipur dekhi hai kya? Mujhe sab samajh mein aa gaya kya coal sector hai. They beset with mafias. But by God's grace, we got over that. Now, how did we go over that? We had to come out with a legislation. And that is why these farm legislation reminds me of my time when we had to come with legislation. Now, what had happened was the government did not have majority in Rajya Sabha. So we could have also done what farm legislation did, ramming it through the Rajya Sabha and pushing it. We didn't. So Mr. Arun Jaitley was then the finance minister, and under his leadership, we tried to meet up and convince everyone related to it. I'll just give you a couple of examples. I remember on one of the rare holidays, I was traveling to Gurgaon to meet my friends, and I got a message that Mr. Arun Jaitley wants me to come to his residence. So I didn't know the background, so I came back, went to his residence, and there was Mr. Naveen Patnaik sitting at his residence. And Mr. Arun Jaitley wanted me to convince Mr. Naveen Patnaik about the utility of the act, that legislation that was in the parliament. And again, there is a chapter in my book, but I won't go into the details because I'd like to interact with you rather than talk myself. So I convinced Mr. Naveen Patnaik that day. And next morning, he held a press conference to say that we will support the bill. Same was the case with Mamata Banerjee. Now, there was this Congress party which was creating all the problem in the parliament. They used to come to the well of the house. So what I did was I sought appointment from Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, who had earlier been labor minister, and I had worked with him. So we had a good relationship. So I rang him up and said, "Sir, aapse milna hai." "Haan, aa jao, aa jao, aa jao. Kal subah aa jao." So I went in the morning. So he treated me with nice pakoras and chai. I had a great relationship with him. Then I told him, "Sir, मैं आपसे एक अनुरोध करने आया हूँ." "हाँ, बताओ अनिल, बताओ." मैंने कहा, "सर, मैं समझता हूँ कि आप इस बिल को सपोर्ट तो नहीं कर पाएंगे, राजनीतिक दृष्टिकोण से आप नहीं कर सकते। मेरा एक अनुरोध है कि आप अपने पार्टी वालों को इतना समझा दीजिए कि वेल में ना आए." In parliament, what happens is if this opposition party comes to the well, the business stalled. You can't conduct that way. So I was requesting in this. हाँ अनिल, अच्छा मैं देखता हूँ, तुम तो जानते हो कैसे होता है, सोनिया जी से बात करते हैं. I don't know what happened. The party did not come to the will of the house and the bill was cleared. Now, why am I telling you all this? Look at what happened to farm legislation. The opposition was only demanding that there should be voting, not merely voice voting. It was rejected. It was pushed through it. The opposition was wanting it to go to the standing committee. It could have gone to the standing committee. What was the hurry? The discussion could have. But the impression that was created was that the government wants to rush through it. Now, good legislation is having serious trouble because of this rush. Because if you make your idea socially relatable, then the other person will at least understand. He may not then oppose to the extent that he would want to, like Mr. Kharge. They still opposed the bill. They still voted against it. But the extent to which opposition was brought down, I think that's very important. As coal secretary, since coal existing in most of the states that were ruled by the opposition party, if I had adopted this approach, coal production would not have gone up. I visited every state, every alternative month, met with the chief minister, chief secretaries, and explained to them the utility of that bill to them. It's very important. They may still say no, but at least the effort has to be made to convince them into believing that what you're doing is right. My experience of 38 years tells me that if you enter into a dialogue with even your adversary, the chances are, if not an agreement, at least he will tone down his opposition. I tell my young friends wherever I talk to, opposition doesn't mean you have to fight with everybody. I mean, give him a thought, give him a hearing, because sometimes what the opposition may be saying may carry a lot of wisdom. Because ultimately, I am the decision maker. No one can force me to take a decision. No, I will decide what I have to decide. So why should I deprive myself of the wisdom that may come from others? Now, as I said earlier, I can go on and on. These days, I'm doing only the easier part, the talking part. But I'll stop here. It's 6:35. I would rather enter into a dialogue, answer your questions, and thereby narrate some other stories if there are any. So thank you very much for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to interact with young people like you. Last time I had gone to SRCC to address you all. This time it's on a virtual mode, but it's always a pleasure. I had very fond memories of SRCC when I was a student in the Allahabad University. I used to come for the cultural festivals here, and SRCC was the place where I used to stay in their hostel to go around and attend these cultural festivals. So thank you very much, and over to you for an interactive session.
It was an honor listening to you and your thoughts, and I believe many of us would have already gained a new perspective on Indian administration. So your words surely act as impetus for students who seek to be Indian administrative officers future ahead. So, sir, there are certain questions posted in the chat box. So, sir, if you're comfortable with it, shall we start?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
One second. And also, if you want to ask questions, you can raise hand and ask questions from sir directly. So, sir, the first question comes from Piyush, and he asks, in spite of being a successful IAS officer, why have you chosen to write two books, your autobiography, not just a civil servant, an ethical IAS officer of being a civil servant? A powerful communicator like you could have adopted the wire route to address the audience, but why writing?
No, I still address the audience. I still talk to them. It's a supplement to that. It has not prevented me from speaking, or the books have not in place of speaking. I do both. But let me tell you the reason why I wrote both the books. Because there are different reasons why I wrote. One's first book was originally for my health insurance scheme, which came to be recognized world over. But as luck would have it, the jobs that I got after Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana was Secretary Coal and Secretary Education, which were very interesting with some very interesting experience. So I incorporated that and I shared with everyone. This second book has a very interesting background. It happened because I used to go to address IS officers of all seniority at the Masuri Academy. And when I interacted with them, I found that the youngsters who joined the service were very enthusiastic. They want to do things. But as they went up the ladder, that enthusiasm dissipated. They became cynical. And I tried to understand why do they become cynical. And in most of the cases that become cynical, these guys are blaming the circumstances, politicians, for their inability to do things. I wanted to contest this. I wanted to present before them, उम्र भर यही भूल करता रहा गालिब, धूल चेहरे पे थी आईना बनता रहा. I wanted to tell them that the problem is not with the system. And even if there is a problem with the system, you can't do a nut about it. But you can do a lot. You are the center of the universe. If you want, you can do it. And the evidence is that despite these problems, there are people like Julius Ribeiro, there are people like T.N. Session, there are people like Mr. Yogendra Rai, there are people like Mr. B.K. Chaturvedi, who have done wonderful, wonderful work. And even today, I write a weekly column. I write a weekly column in the Guardian where I bring forth a story of an officer who's done wonderfully well. So I'm looking at those people who are doing well. And this will apply to you all also. You have a choice to look at failures. You have choice to curse because many people have failed. You have also choice to learn from those that have succeeded. The choice is totally yours. All sorts of examples are available in this country. So I exhort my colleague officers to look at such officers who have managed to perform despite these difficult set of circumstances and learn from that. There are no blacks and white in our existence. There are no good or bad in our existence. Whatever exists, the choice is yours to look at and learn and feel inspired. So that's why I wrote the second book.
So much, sir.
Yes. So we have our next question from Abhishek Yadav. So, what do you think about the mission Karmi Yogi to reform civil services? Yeah. Just yes, sir.
I'm so glad. Sorry. Please carry on.
Yes, sir. So, what do you think about the mission Karmi Yogi to reform civil services in India? Are management skills of IIM graduates really better than that of IS officers?
See, there are two parts to the question. One is whether Mission Karmi Yogi is good, and the second is whether the IIM graduates are good at management. Let me answer both these questions. Number one, yes, Mission Karmi Yogi was long overdue, but my only problem with the government is, both inside and outside, is yes, we've been talking about this for quite some time. Get it moving, get it done. You know, if you look at a chapter in my book where I've clearly outlined what needs to be done to the IS, because what we do in the IS, we select, and some of you would be aspirants, we select people who are brilliant, bright, sharp, and they're able to answer questions in the examination hall in 3 hours. But that does that make you a good leader? Leadership requires other attributes. So I have advocated in my book that the examination, the UPSC is one of the finest bodies, but the examination system, which is presently prevalent, selects brilliant individuals, not good leaders. Some IS officers do become good leaders on their own, but across the board, they are bright, brilliant, they do good to themselves, but as a group, no. So that's the problem there, and I hope Mission Karmi Yogi sorts that out. Now let us look at IIM. See, I have seen I go to IIMs, almost all IIMs at some point in time to interact with people there. They're doing very well for themselves, but the approach is totally different. Why is it different? The approach in the private sector is, I'm sorry to say, maximizing of profits. The kick that they get out of what they're doing is making more money. So if you look at a conversation going on between some graduates, IIM graduates who are not a part of the government, you say कि उसकी salary package कितना है? वो कहेगा नहीं उसका salary package तो इतना. What are we discussing? As civil servant, when I was doing this RSBY, I got an offer from the World Bank, and they said that they will give me $1,000 a day. $1,000 a day for 5 years. Imagine how much money is that for doing that scheme in other countries of the world. I didn't go. So what is the reason why I didn't go? Let me give you another incident. How much time do we have? We close at 7 o'clock.
No, sir, we can go. You can share your thought that much as you want.
I'd like to go because I have some other thing to do. But let me narrate this story to you for you to understand what am I doing and why am I doing and why a civil servant who's driven. Because in my book, I write, I became an IAS officer because my father wanted me to become an IAS officer. So I made his dream my dream. But at the end of the book, in the last chapter, I read that if I were to be born again, I'd like to be an IAS officer all over again. Why? Because there's no other service in the world where you can derive such enormous amount of satisfaction in helping the poorest of the poor. Let me give you an example. When I was doing this scheme, RSBY, it came to be recognized world over. ILO, UNDP, World Bank, everyone said this is a brilliant scheme. So when Obama became the president of the US, his advisors rang me up. They wanted me to make a presentation on health insurance in Washington. So I tried to wriggle out. I said, ours is a different scheme, different country, but they insisted. So in my next visit to Washington, I went to Brookings institute that houses advisors of the president. And I made a presentation on this health insurance scheme. And during the presentation, there were other government officers, there were foundations like Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, some people from India also. After the presentation, I was having a cup of tea. This guy from Gates Foundation walks up to me and asks me, sir, you are a civil servant, but you seem to be very passionate about your scheme. What is the government giving you beyond your salary? It's a very difficult question. Why do you do what you do? So I paused for a while and I asked this guy from Gates Foundation, I asked him, what does Gates Foundation get? Because it gives millions of dollars to poor country. Why do you do that? He said, well, that's a job. But more than that, I derive enormous amount of satisfaction in helping the poorest of the poor. I said, you answered your own question. The RSBY is meant for the poorest of the poor, many of whom would have been dead but for this scheme. So the good wishes of people who survived and their families come back to me somehow, anyhow. That's good enough a kick for me to do what I'm doing. And then I narrated an incident to him, which is given in my book. I used to visit these small hospitals that were empaneled under the scheme. Once I was visiting a hospital and I was talking to a beneficiary patient, I heard a very feeble voice from behind. She was calling me Beta idhar aao. I turned around and I saw a very old lady. She could barely sit, calling me. She was flashing the smart card. So I went to her and bent down and asked her, Mata ji, aap theek to hain? She says, बेटा मैं बहुत तकलीफ में हूँ, लेकिन इन अस्पताल वालों ने मेरा बड़ा ख्याल रखा. I said, फिर आप ठीक हो जाएंगे, अपने घर जाएंगे. She said, नहीं नहीं नहीं, मेरा तो ना कोई बेटा है ना भाई है, मेरी तो उम्र इतनी हो गई, अब मैं ऊपर वाले के पास जाऊंगी. This argument continued for 10 minutes. And then she made a very remarkable statement. She says, बेटा ऊपर वाले जाके एक बात जरूर कहूंगी, तुम्हारी स्कीम बहुत अच्छी है. I call these my Bharat Ratnas. Not one, many of them. When I narrate this story to you, I get goosebumps. What else do you want in life? I'm comfortable with what the government gave me. Now, there's no end to it because, I have often wondered, why do people buy Mercedes car? Because whoever owns Mercedes car, it is driven by a driver. So all the pleasure of driving goes to the driver. You sit in the back seat. If you close your eyes, you won't even realize you're sitting in Mercedes. But still people spend money, 80-85 lakhs. They do it not for their comfort. They do it to show to the पड़ोसी. उन पड़ोसी के लिए करता, अपने लिए थोड़ी ना करता. अपनी आवश्यकता है तो ज्यादा नहीं है, लेकिन पड़ोसी आपको. Yeah, I also did it. No, when I was youngster, I used to grow my hair long and wear those bell bottoms, thinking that I was Amitabh Bachchan. I mean, what stupid. But I thought I was showing to others that I am as good as Amitabh Bachchan. We do that. Once you can get over it, and government service gives you that opportunity of being grounded. You have a choice of not being grounded. You have all sorts of people with a choice.
Thank you so much for answering the question, sir.
So the next question is from Anmol Garg. Anmol Garg, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So, sir, your last posting was in the HRD ministry as a secretary. So, it was during tenure that there was a controversy surrounding the CBSE paper leak. So, how do you overcome all such controversies and challenges which you faced during your tenure as a civil servant?
In the beginning of my career, I used to feel troubled by these things because I didn't really know whether I should do this, idhar jaun ya udhar jaun. But as you go up in the ladder, you're very clear headed. You know what to do and you're prepared to face consequences. Once you do that, then you're not troubled with these things. So when this information came to me, as I was telling you earlier, I was in Dehradun attending to my ailing father. So the chairman CBSE rang me up and she said, sir, ye leak ho gaya hai, lekin iske fact ye. And she told me the whole facts. I said, you hold a press conference and explain the whole thing to the media. She said, Mantri, mujhe permit nahi kar raha hai press conference ke liye. And I said, okay. Then I spoke to the minister. I told him, sir, आप बात कीजिए मीडिया से, नहीं वो बात करें. मीडिया में फैल गया था कि अनीता करवल यहाँ से भाग गई है, अपने घर चली गई अहमदाबाद. I said, sir, इसको डिस्पेल करने के लिए नहीं इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है, कुछ ऐसा खास नहीं, मैंने बता दिया. Nothing. So next morning I brought my father to Delhi because he had to be admitted to a hospital here. And next morning I went to meet the minister. By that time the whole problem had blown out of proportion. So I said, sir, no, he told me कि उनको तो अनीता करवल को हटाना पड़ेगा, something which I narrated. Then I insisted, sir, कि उनको हटाने से काम नहीं चलेगा. Then the issue was, now that's the solution to the problem. Media से कौन बात करेगा? Because media was very aggressive. So I volunteered. I said, I'll talk to them. Now I was prepared to, if you face your fears, if you face your problems, the chances are that you'll solve them. It is when you are trying to duck the problem that the problem becomes bigger. I had sufficient experience to understand the implications of consequences of what I was saying. So I said, वो बोले अरे आप कर लेंगे. मैं क्या करेगी मीडिया, मुझे मार पीट के देगी, क्या करेगी भाई? They will ask me questions, I'll answer those questions. They're not going to write my ACR. Let's see. Then he said, नहीं वो PMO से बात करनी पड़ी. So all of us went to PMO. वहां we spoke to the principal secretary. He said, बड़ा सीरियस मामला, हमें PM से बात करनी पड़ेगी. So I told him, सर मुझे बता दीजिए मैं क्या करूं. मीडिया को बोला नहीं मीडिया बुला लो, हमारी राय ठीक है, बट कौन करेगा बात? तो मिनिस्टर की तरफ उन्होंने देख कर कहा कौन करेगा. मैंने कहा साहब चिंता न कीजिए, मैं बात करूंगा. So since I had worked with him, he knew my background. So he said, okay, जाओ तुम बुला लो, 5 बजे बुला लो मीडिया को, हम तब तक क्लियरेंस ले लेंगे प्रधानमंत्री से. Now this was a holiday. So I came to my office. Media was called. They came at 4:30 instead of 5 o'clock because everyone was excited to know about it. Now, no message from PMO. And that 1.5 hours was probably the worst of my life because I was waiting for this call. Media sitting in another room, I am sitting here. 6 o'clock, I got the clearance. I went and spoke to the media. Some of you find time, look at that. It has become it went viral, that interview with the media. They were howling, shouting. I was telling them what steps we are taking. And I was also asking them, आपके पास कोई दूसरा सुझाव तो बता दीजिए. खाली चीखने से थोड़ी ना समस्या का समाधान होता है. And it got totally taken care of. Anita Karwal survived, and she is now, as I said, Secretary of Education, Government of India. So it's a question of, if the trouble is not of your making, then it's much easier to handle it. If it is your making, then because you are a guilty person, no? If you are not directly guilty, then it becomes much easier.
That was really insightful, sir.
So we have another question from Priyanka. He asked, when this generation has a whole different point of view about government administration, do you think we still have hope to change and be a part of government bodies?
See, I have often been advising youngsters like you that don't bother about government bodies or nation or society. इतने लोग देश के लिए लड़ रहे हैं, वो सब देश का बेड़ागर कर रहे हैं. आज जिससे बात कीजिए वो नेशनलिस्ट की बात करता है. Any one of you following me on Twitter, you'll see I have just tweeted about 2 hours ago something. That nationalists के नाम पे हम क्या कर रहे हैं? So I advise differently. I advise youngsters कि you focus on yourself. जब तक आप धरातल पर नहीं खड़े होंगे, तो आपकी बात कौन सुनने वाला है? आप करते रहिए नेशनलिस्ट की बात. I am not against nationalism. What I am saying is, in the name of nationalism, we are not doing what we ought to do. The Mahatma said it very clearly. He said it: be the change you wish to see in the world. So it has to start with you. आप खुद ही को तो बुलंद कीजिए, अपने आप को इस लायक बनाइए कि आप कुछ कह सकें. Don't worry about others, because let me narrate you another instance, because we are so hassled about others. When I had just joined the service, I got married, and we were driving in my wife and I, we were going in a car, and I used to get very agitated with traffic jams. Some of you also must be getting very agitated. So मेरा खून खोलता था बिल्कुल, तो क्या है ये, कैसे? One day my wife asked me, तुम इनका कुछ कर सकते हो, जो ट्रैफिक जैम कर रहे हैं? मैंने कहा मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ, मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता. तो जब कुछ कर नहीं सकते तो अपना खून क्यों जला रहे हो? See how important is this? We spend so much time on issues over which we have no control. So don't bother about others. Before I joined the IS, I was in the police. So I remember during my probation days, one officer, a colleague officer, walked up to me, said, "Boss, रात को नींद नहीं आ रही." मैंने क्या हो गया? बॉस, पेट्रोलियम के दाम बहुत बढ़ रहे हैं. मैंने कहा यार, पेट्रोलियम के दाम तो बढ़ रहे हैं, लेकिन तुम्हारे रात को ना सोने से क्या पेट्रोलियम के दाम कम हो जाएंगे? बोले यार, कम तो नहीं होंगे, लेकिन देश की आर्थिक स्थिति पर कुप्रभाव पड़ रहा है. These experts, which I call them परेशान, मिस्टर परेशान, वो सिर्फ परेशान होते हैं, करते करते कुछ नहीं. तो मैंने कहा यार ठीक है, चर्चा के लिए ठीक है, बट तुम रात की नींद मत हराम करो. बोले हाँ यार सही है, रात की नींद हराम करने से क्या होगा. चला गया. 3 महीने बाद फिर आया, कहता बॉस रात को नींद नहीं आ रही. मैंने कहा अब क्या हो गया? पेट्रोलियम के दाम तो अपने आप ठीक हो गए तुम्हारे बिना इंटरवेंशन के. नहीं बॉस, देश की पॉपुलेशन बहुत बढ़ रही है. Then I told him, यार रात को सो जाओ, अपने आप ठीक हो जाएगी. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we get hassled over issues over which we have absolutely no control. So my dear friend, whoever asked me this question, you will be able to contribute in any organization provided you are good, not because of organization. Because organization का आप कुछ नहीं कर सकते, अपना कर सकते हैं. So be totally focused. I mean, I use the word wrongly, but that's how I use it. Become totally selfish. You are the center of universe. You have to do what you have to do. Don't bother about it. सुबह एक शीशा देखिए, रात को शीशा देखिए सोने से पहले. अपने अंदर झांकिए, improve yourself. You might be finding me very fluent now. I could barely speak a sentence or write 2-3 sentences in English or Hindi. It was as bad as that. I was in class 12, had physics, chemistry, and maths. We had no time for language. Then I switched over to humanities. So I had to improve my language. And I tried and I did succeed to a certain extent. So I was right from the beginning totally focused on myself. Of course, once you are focused on yourself, gradually your domain will increase. Gradually you'll start influencing people. But don't start. एक कुछ दिन पहले वेबिनार हुआ था, वो सब नौजवान जो है देश को चेंज करना चाह रहे थे. मैंने कहा भैया पहले अपने आप को तो बदल लो. हर जना हमारी मांगे पूरी हो, चाहे जो मजबूरी हो, देश के लिए मर जाएंगे. हमने कहा जाके गोली चलाओ. हर जना आजकल जोश में है ना, जोश हो रहा है ना आजकल, हर जना जोश में है. देश के गद्दारों को गोली मारो सालो. What is that? It is nonsense. But we get carried away with all this. We get carried away. Instead of looking inside, inwards, all the great people on this earth, if you analyze them, they were first class individuals. Whether it was Gandhi, Vivekanand, they were brilliant individuals in themselves. Then they tried to influence the society. It's not the other way around. I think we have about 7 minutes. So you can conclude. What my suggestion to all of you is, I would request you to convey my email ID to everyone, and whoever was in touch with me, he or she can convey my telephone number to each one of you. If you have any further questions, queries, anything, you can come back to me. Even as Secretary Government of India, I used to respond in 24 hours, and those that have interacted with me will bear with it. No matter how busy was I. Unfortunately, fortunately, I was never so busy. I mean, that's another aspect which you have to learn, that you have to trust people, delegate, so that you are not unnecessarily busy. I was never unnecessarily busy. My table used to be clean always. I used to leave my office at 6 o'clock dot for 4 years as Secretary Government of India, except the first 2 months as School Secretary. So I'll respond to your questions. My telephone number can be given. My email ID can be given. You can get in touch with me. Such questions as have not been asked today can be asked. I'll try and respond. Okay. So you can take up a couple of more questions before we conclude.
Okay, so can I take one question? More questions shall I take? Yeah, so Mansi has raised her hand a while ago. So do you want to ask a question, Mansi?
Actually, it got well addressed by the sir itself. Like I was trying to ask, like the civil servants do face some kind of pressures from politicians, and like that internal peace is left somewhere behind. Like we come across so many articles like the IS officers resigns just because of these things. But as you said, like we should see towards our internal. So that question got addressed very nicely. Thank you, sir.
My suggestion to all you youngsters is, there is an American monk by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr. He made a very seminal statement. He said, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things that I can, and the wisdom to understand the difference between them. Those of you that are aspiring to become civil servant, don't join the service as a revolutionary. If you want to be a revolutionary, don't join the civil service, pick up a jhadu and join a political party. But if you want to do things, then join the service. Understand the limitation within which you are working. Understanding the limitation does not mean that you should not put in effort. Understanding the limitation is you define your boundaries, and let me guarantee you from my personal experience that boundary grows. So when there is a coal crisis, they will look for Mr. Anil Swarup. I didn't ask. I never ever went to any politician for any favor, ever. Never. The one example that I gave when I went to Mallikarjun Kharge was for an official business, not for a personal favor. For official business, I used to go and meet politicians many times. I met Mamata Banerjee. I met Mr. Naveen Patnaik. I used to meet all the chief ministers for official work. Never ever for any personal favor. If you don't, and I'll conclude with this, if you don't expect things from others, you are the most powerful person on earth. It is your expectation of others that makes you weak. The moment you feel that I'll do the best that I can, you will become powerful. But the question that you have to ask yourself before you go to sleep is whether you did the best that you could. Because apne aap se koi jhoot nahi bolta. Your evaluation will not be done by others. We are so bothered about all the cosmetics sold in the country is people trying to get evaluated by others. All cosmetics, all branded clothes are for evaluation by others. But if you evaluate yourself, which you can over a period of time, you can actually, then you will be able to improve as an individual. Our attempt should, even today, why I take an offer from everyone. Today I'm talking to SRCC. Tomorrow it's St. Stephen's. Then it is Ramjas. Then there it is all colleges I'm talking to, all engineering colleges. I have visited all IIMs, all IITs. Why do I interact with youngsters? Because for a very selfish reason, when I speak to youngsters like you, I also feel energized. You are the future of the country. If you don't have energy, then you will have. So I get inspired. I get that energy from you. And it keeps me going even at this age. So as I keep saying, I'm a very selfish man, totally looking inwards, trying to see if I can improve even now. People say, you've done this, what is more is left? No, it's a journey, it still continues so long as I'm alive. So in that journey, if you can come across bright young people like you all, I feel energized. And that's why I interact with all of you. Okay. So I will conclude here. Thank you very much for inviting me here. May I once again request all of you to take my email ID and my telephone number. In case you happen to read Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, I look forward to your comments because it would help me improve for my next book. So look forward to interacting with you at some point in time, but it was a pleasure being with you for this very short while. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you so much. We would like to thank you for such an enlightening session on the topic making things happen in the government and taking time for interacting with us. We owe you a special vote of thanks, and the Commerce Society feels honored and privileged to have hosted you today. Thank you so much, sir.
God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.